I'm James, I'm 35, and at my grandfather's 73rd birthday dinner, my own father looked me in the eye and called me a failure in front of our entire family and a dozen strangers. Before I tell you how I froze his retirement fund the next morning, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who you're talking to. The restaurant was the kind of place my father, Robert, loved. Dim lighting, heavy silverware that felt important in your hand, and wine lists with prices that looked more like serial numbers. It was my grandfather George's 73rd birthday, and the whole Wilson clan was there. My parents, Robert and Linda, my younger sister, Emma, and her husband, Daniel, the family's golden boy, my Uncle Harold and Aunt Margaret, and a few cousins, and me with my girlfriend, Sophia. For me, walking into these family gatherings always felt like preparing for a quiet, slow-motion car crash. You know it's coming. You just don't know how bad the damage will be this time. The tension had been building all night, a low hum beneath the polite chatter. It always did. It started when my sister Emma, beaming, announced that she and Daniel were looking at vacation homes in the Hamptons. My father puffed out his chest, his face glowing with pride as if he'd just personally brokered the deal. "That's my girl," he said, raising his glass of expensive Cabernet, always aiming higher. "That's the Wilson way." A little later, I tried to share some good news of my own. "I actually just got a promotion at the firm," I said, trying to find a gap in the conversation. "It's a senior project manager role." Before I could even explain what that meant, my father cut in, turning his back to me slightly. "George," he said, his voice booming to my grandfather at the other end of the table. "Did I tell you about the new contract Daniel landed? An absolute monster of a deal. The commission alone is more than some people make in a year." The subject of my career was not just dismissed. It was obliterated, paved over by the shiny new highway of Daniel's success. The final straw came when Sophia, trying to be helpful, mentioned my volunteer work. "I spend my Saturday mornings teaching basic coding to underprivileged kids at the local community center." "It's so wonderful what you do, James," she said, her hand resting on my arm, her warmth a small shield against the family chill. My father let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound like grinding glass. "That's what people do when their careers stall," he said, not even looking at me. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "It keeps them busy." Then he turned his gaze on me, his eyes cold and hard as river stones. He raised his voice just enough for the tables nearby to stop their own conversations and turn. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with a deep, theatrical disappointment, "this family has produced generations of successful men, business leaders, lawyers, innovators." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the table as if to say, "Look at the legacy I am a part of. At least this family never had a failure like you." The world went silent. The clinking of forks stopped. I could feel the eyes of strangers on my back, a burning, prickling sensation of second-hand humiliation. Sophia's hand tightened on mine until her knuckles were white. My mother looked down at her plate, her face pale, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her china. Uncle Harold looked mortified, his face flushed with a helpless anger on my behalf. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. For years I had swallowed the insults, the dismissals, the casual cruelty. But this was different. This was a public execution, and my own father was the executioner. I looked directly at him. For the first time, he didn't see a son desperate for approval. He saw nothing. A void. I calmly placed my napkin on the table. "Excuse me," I said to the table at large. I pulled out my wallet, dropped a $100 bill on the table, more than enough for my share, and stood up. I helped Sophia with her chair, and we walked out of that restaurant without looking back. The next morning, my mother called, her voice frantic. "James, the car is gone. Someone stole your father's car." I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, a cup of coffee in my hand. I felt a strange, unnerving sense of calm. "It wasn't stolen, Mom," I said, my voice even and clear. "It's not his car. It's my car. And I took it back. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a stunned silence. I hung up the phone. The quiet war of my entire life was about to get very, very loud. To understand why I took the car, why I did what I did next, you have to understand that my father's public declaration wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the eruption of a volcano that had been rumbling for 35 years. It was the final note in a long, sad symphony of disrespect. A symphony I had been forced to listen to my entire life. My family, the Wilsons, had a very specific definition of success. It had to be loud. It had to be flashy. It meant a corner office, a German car, and a membership at the right country club. I chose a different path. I became an electrical engineer. I loved the logic of it, the quiet satisfaction of solving a complex problem, of creating something tangible that worked. To me, that was success. To my father, it was a blue-collar trade dressed up in a button-down shirt. It was a disappointment. I remember being 10 years old. I'd spent a whole month in the garage building a crystal radio from a kit. I'd soldered the connections myself, wound the copper wire, and when I finally put on the headphones and heard the faint, crackling voice of a distant AM station, it felt like I had discovered magic. I ran inside, bursting with pride, to show my father. He glanced at the mess of wires and wood. "That's nice, son," he said, before turning his attention to a finger painting my sister Emma, who was 7, had just made. "Now look at this, Linda. Emma's a regular Picasso. Let's put this right on the fridge." My radio sat in the garage, collecting dust. The pattern had started early. When it came time for college, I told them I wanted to major in engineering. I can still see the look on my father's face. We were in the living room, the air thick with his disappointment. "An engineer?" he'd said, his voice flat. "A technician? I thought you were going to go to law school like your cousin, or at least business." To him, it was a failure of ambition before I'd even started. My sister Emma, on the other hand, did everything right. She got a marketing degree from a prestigious university and married Daniel Chun, a charismatic investment banker who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. The first time I met him, he shook my hand with a grip that was a little too firm, his eyes scanning me up and down, sizing me up in a fraction of a second. "James, right? Electrical engineer," he'd said with a dazzling smile. "Fascinating. Must be nice to work with your hands." It was a compliment designed to be an insult, and he was an artist at it. From that day on, they were the power couple. Their success was the kind my father could brag about at the golf course. My contributions were quieter. 3 years ago, my father's company downsized, and he was forced into an early retirement he wasn't prepared for. He had his pride, but I knew his finances were shaky. So I went to a financial advisor, a man named Bill Parker, and I set up a retirement fund for them. I funded it myself, a lump sum of $250,000. I remember signing the paperwork, feeling a sense of quiet pride. I was taking care of them. I was being a good son. I put the fund entirely under my name, with them as the sole beneficiaries. It just seemed cleaner, simpler. Bill advised it was the most straightforward way to manage it. I told my parents I'd made some good investments and wanted to make sure they were comfortable. They accepted it without much fuss, as if it were their due. There was no gushing gratitude, just a simple, "Well, that's good, son. It's about time those investments paid off." A year after that, my dad's old sedan finally gave out. He complained endlessly about it. For his 67th birthday, I went to a dealership and bought him a new luxury sedan. A beautiful, deep blue car that smelled of leather and success. For insurance purposes, it was simpler to keep the car registered in my name. I just handed him the keys. "Happy birthday, Dad." He nodded, a rare, small smile on his face as he ran his hand over the hood. That smile, I thought at the time, was worth every penny. How wrong I was. These gestures were never enough. They were absorbed into the family narrative as footnotes, while Emma and Daniel's achievements were headlines. I remember one Thanksgiving, just a few months after I'd bought him the car. I was excited because a patent I had been working on for 2 years had finally been submitted. It was a big deal for me, a potential game-changer in my field. When I brought it up, my father just waved his hand dismissively. That's nice, James. Then he turned to Daniel. Danny, tell everyone about that watch your company gave you. A Rolex, wasn't it? And for the next 15 minutes, we all had to listen to the story of a timepiece, while my years of work were forgotten. It was 1,000 small cuts like that. I was the family's silent fixer, the invisible safety net. At Christmas, Emma and Daniel gave my parents 2 all-inclusive tickets to Bali. It was a grand gesture, and my mother cried with joy. Later that night, I got a frantic call from Emma. I messed up, James. We put it on the credit card and we can't make the payment. The power couple was a facade. I quietly transferred $5,000 to her account to cover it, telling her to just say it was a work bonus. She accepted it without question. My money, my stability, was the silent, unacknowledged scaffolding that held up their glittering image. I was the one who paid the property tax bill when they forgot. I was the one who covered the bill for a new water heater when there's burst in the middle of winter. I was the one who spent hours on the phone with my mom, talking her down from some minor social anxiety, or with my dad troubleshooting his computer problems. It wasn't just financial labor, it was emotional labor, and it was completely invisible to them. My girlfriend, Sophia, saw it long before I did. She's a pediatrician, smart and observant, with a no-nonsense attitude that I loved. After her first few family dinners with the Wilsons, she sat me down. James, she said gently, do you see what's happening here? It's not about you not being successful. It's about them using you. You're their utility. You're not a son. You're a function. The words stung because they were true. My best friend, Michael, a fellow engineer, was more blunt. Dude, they're walking all over you. You need to grow a spine. I knew they were right, but it's one thing to know it and another thing to act on it. The real turning point, the moment the ground truly shifted beneath my feet, happened a few days before that fateful birthday dinner. It began with a nagging feeling. My parents' spending seemed to have increased lately. My mother mentioned a new set of expensive golf clubs for my father and a weekend spa trip for herself. I was happy they were enjoying themselves, but I logged into the online portal for their retirement fund, just to check on things. My heart stopped. I saw a series of large withdrawals over the past 6 months. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. A total of nearly $60,000 was gone. The fund was designed for steady, managed distributions, not for lump sum withdrawals to fund a lavish lifestyle. My hand was shaking as I called my mother. Mom! I tried to keep my voice steady. I was looking at the retirement fund. There have been some very large withdrawals. There was a pause. Oh, that, she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too casual. Don't you worry about that, dear. We talked to Daniel about it. Daniel? I asked, my blood running cold. What does Daniel have to do with it? Well, he's an investment banker, James. He knows about these things. He looked at the portfolio and said the investments were doing so well, it was foolish to just let the money sit there. He said we should be enjoying our profits. He even helped your father set up the online withdrawals. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the phone feeling heavy as a brick in my hand. I could barely breathe. It wasn't just that they were draining the fund I had worked so hard to build for their security. It was that they had gone behind my back. They had trusted the flashy advice of their golden boy son-in-law over the quiet, steady provision of their own son. He told them to spend, and they spent. I had given them a shield for their old age, and they were using it as a credit card with Daniel as their enabler. And then came the final, crushing blow. The true betrayal. That's wonderful, honey, my mother continued, oblivious to the earthquake she had just set off in my world. And speaking of Daniel, he has this incredible new investment opportunity, a private equity thing, and he said we could get in on it. The bank just needs a little more collateral for the loan. He was wondering if you'd be willing to co-sign. It would just be a formality, of course. He'll handle everything. Silence. My money wasn't enough. My car wasn't enough. My support wasn't enough. Now they wanted to use my name, my credit, my financial stability, the very things I had built through years of careful, unglamorous work, as a backstop for Daniel's next big gamble. I was no longer just the safety net. I was the fuel for their fantasy life. a fantasy directed by Daniel and starring Daniel. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. It was the kind of clarity that comes after a high fever breaks. The hope I had carried for so long, the foolish belief that one day they would see me, finally died. It wasn't a loud death. It was a quiet, final click, like a lock snapping into place. "No," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "No? What do you mean, no, James? It's for the family." "No, Mom," I repeated. "I won't be doing that." I hung up the phone before she could reply. I stood there in my silent kitchen and knew, with absolute certainty, that everything had to change. I didn't know how yet, but the line had been drawn. The dinner at the restaurant a few days later wasn't the cause. It was just the public unveiling of a decision I had already made in my heart. My father didn't just call me a failure. He confirmed everything I had just realized. He gave me the final, unassailable permission to act. Walking into that restaurant for my grandfather's birthday dinner felt different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking in hoping for approval. I was walking in as an observer, a scientist studying a strange and dysfunctional species in its natural habitat. The insults and slights that usually felt like paper cuts now felt like data points, evidence for a conclusion I had already reached. I brought Sophia. She was my rock. Before we went in, I had told her about the phone call with my mother, about the request to co-sign the loan. I saw a flash of pure anger in her eyes, quickly replaced by a fierce loyalty. "Okay," she'd said, her voice low and serious. "So tonight we watch, we listen, and we don't let them get to you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm with you, whatever happens." So when Emma started talking about the Hamptons, a smug smile on her face, I didn't feel a pang of jealousy or inadequacy. I just watched my father's face light up and thought, data point number 1. The performance of wealth is more important than actual wealth. I caught Sophia's eye, and she gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She saw it too. When my promotion was brushed aside for the 100th time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of disappointment. I just took a sip of water and thought, data point number 2. My achievements are a threat to the established narrative. The narrative was that Daniel was the success, and I was the dependable, slightly disappointing background character. My success complicated that. Therefore, it had to be ignored. Under the table, Sophia gently squeezed my knee, a silent message of support. Daniel, as always, was holding court. He was on his second glass of expensive wine and was pontificating about the market. "The key right now is aggressive growth," he announced to the table, though his words were clearly aimed at my father. "You can't be timid. People who stick their money in safe bets, intangible assets, they're leaving a fortune on the table. You have to be liquid, you have to be bold." He then looked directly at me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. It's a different mindset, of course. Professions based on billable hours like engineering or trades, they have a hard ceiling on earning potential. It's a respectable living, for sure, but it's not where real wealth is created. Data point number 3. Daniel needs to reinforce his superiority at all costs. I made a mental note of that. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not confidence, but a desperate, almost manic need for validation. He wasn't just bragging, he was selling. He was selling his own myth. At the time, I just filed it away. It was only later that I'd understand what that flicker truly meant. It was the sweat on the brow of a liar. "Daniel's right," my father boomed, slapping the table lightly. "You've got to be a shark. This boy's a shark." He beamed at Daniel, who soaked up the praise like a dry sponge. The real show began when Sophia tried to defend me. God love her. She thought she was throwing me a lifeline. She mentioned the volunteer work I did on weekends. She saw it as a mark of character. My father saw it as an admission of professional failure. "That's what people do when their careers stall," he said, the line delivered with the casual cruelty of a man swatting a fly. He wasn't just insulting me. He was insulting the very idea of doing something for reasons other than money or status. He was insulting character itself. "I think it shows a lot of compassion," Sophia countered, her voice polite but firm. My father waved her comment away. Compassion doesn't pay the bills. And that's when he stood up, figuratively speaking, and delivered the knockout blow. He announced to the world that his family was one of winners, and that I, his son, was the exception. The failure. As the words echoed in the sudden silence, a strange thing happened. The hurt I expected to feel wasn't there. It was like watching a building you knew was condemned finally get hit by the wrecking ball. It was loud, it was messy, but it wasn't a surprise. All I felt was a profound, chilling calm. The last thread of hope, the last vestige of the little boy who just wanted his dad to be proud of his crystal radio, had been severed. My jaw tightened, a muscle jumping along my cheek. That was it. The final data point. Conclusion reached. My silent departure was the only response necessary. As we walked out into the cool night air, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind us, I felt Sophia's arm loop through mine. "I am so sorry, James," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet fury. "No one should be spoken to like that, especially not by their own father." Just then, Uncle Harold, my dad's older brother, hurried after us. He was a quiet, gentle man who had always looked at me with a kind of sad sympathy. He looked flustered, his face red. "James," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to hear that." "It's okay, Uncle Harold," I said, and I meant it. "It's nothing I haven't heard before." "It's not okay," he insisted, his brow furrowed with worry. "Your father, he's always been like this, insecure. He was always trying to live up to our dad's expectations, and he's putting the same pressure on you. It's not fair." His words were meant to comfort me, but they did something more. They confirmed that this wasn't my fault. I wasn't crazy. The dysfunction was real, and someone else saw it too. "Don't let him destroy you, son," Harold said, his voice low. I looked at my kind, sad uncle, a man who had navigated these toxic waters his whole life by staying quiet, and I knew I had to choose a different path. "I won't," I said, my voice firm. "I won't let him." That night, sleep was impossible. Sophia stayed with me, holding my hand, not offering easy platitudes, just being there, a warm, solid presence in the dark. But my mind was a whirlwind. I kept replaying scenes from my life, from childhood to that very evening. The thousand small cuts, the blatant favoritism, the financial drain, the final, crushing request to co-sign a loan for the man who was replacing me. Was I a bad son? The question echoed in my mind. For years, I'd done everything I thought a good son should do. I was respectful. I was helpful. I was financially responsible for them in ways they never even knew. I had provided a safety net woven from my own hard work and sacrifice. And in return, they held me in contempt. They saw my quiet competence as failure and Daniel's loud arrogance as success. I thought about my mother, and a wave of guilt washed over me. She was weak, trapped between a domineering husband and a son she didn't understand. But was she complicit? Yes. Her silence was a form of permission. Her request for the loan was a betrayal. Around 3 a.m., I got out of bed and went to my home office. I sat in the dark, the glow of my computer monitor illuminating my face. The anger was there, a white-hot coal in my chest. But there was something else, too, a sense of liberation. The burden of hope was gone, and in its place was a steely resolve. They saw me as a utility, a resource, a failure who was, paradoxically, useful for his money. Fine. It was time to turn off the utilities. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to have a dramatic confrontation. That was their language, not mine. My language was logic, action and consequence, cause and effect. I was an engineer. I was going to solve this problem by dismantling the machine that was causing it. I spent the next 2 hours mapping it out. A flow chart of action. First, the fund. I pulled up the original documents I had signed with Bill Parker. I read every line of the fine print. The language was ironclad. As the sole founder and manager of the trust, I had absolute discretionary power. I could freeze it, redirect it, or dissolve it. Second, the car. I found the title and the registration in my filing cabinet. My name and my name alone was on them. It was legally, unequivocally my property. Third, the other miscellaneous expenses. The country club membership I paid for. The premium cable package. All of it was tied to my credit cards. A plan formed, clean and efficient. As the sun began to rise, casting a gray light into my office, the grief and anger had cooled and hardened into something new. Purpose. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing this out of self-preservation. This wasn't revenge. This was a boundary, a firewall. I knew the fallout would be immense. My mother would cry. My sister would rage. My father would threaten. They would paint me as the villain, the cruel and ungrateful son. Let them. Their opinions were no longer part of the equation. I showered, got dressed, and made coffee. At exactly 8:01 a.m., when I knew his office would be open, I picked up the phone and dialed my financial advisor. The war was about to move from my heart to the real world. Bill Parker's office, this is Sarah. Hi, Sarah. It's James Wilson for Bill. My voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil of the past 12 hours. The sleepless night felt like a distant memory. Now it was all about execution. Bill came on the line a moment later. James, good to hear from you. Everything all right? Bill was a straight shooter, a man who appreciated directness. I decided to give it to him. Bill, I need to make some immediate changes to the Wilson Family Trust Fund set up a few years ago, I said, getting straight to the point. Okay, he said, a note of caution entering his voice. I could hear the faint clicking of his keyboard as he pulled up my file. What did you have in mind? Effective immediately. I want you to freeze all distributions and deny any and all withdrawal requests from the beneficiaries, Robert and Linda Wilson. There was a moment of charged silence on the other end. This was not a normal request. In his world of retirement planning, this was the nuclear option. Freeze them completely? Bill asked, his professional voice carefully neutral. James, can I ask what this is about? We generally have a protocol for this kind of thing, a notification period for the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries have been making unauthorized and, in my view, irresponsible withdrawals against my advice and without my knowledge, I said, cutting him off. I wasn't rude, just firm. The fund was established for their long-term security, and that security is now at risk. The notification period is waived. This is a matter of protecting the asset. I see, he said slowly. The keyboard clicking continued. He was reviewing the trust document. He knew the legal standing as well as I did. He was the one who had advised me on this specific setup for this very reason, to protect the fund from creditors or poor decisions. He just never imagined the poor decisions would come from the beneficiaries themselves. Furthermore, I continued, my resolve hardening with every word, I want a full audit of all withdrawals made from the fund over the past 3 years. I want a detailed, itemized report sent to me and only me by the end of the week. This was the masterstroke. It wasn't just about cutting them off. It was about creating an undeniable, black and white record of their behavior. A weapon of pure fact. I understand, Bill said, his voice now all business. He knew this was serious. As the sole trustee, you have that authority. I'll execute the freeze immediately. The audit will take a few days, but I'll get it to you as soon as it's ready. I'll send you a confirmation email once the freeze is in place. Thank you, Bill, I said. James, he added, just before we hung up, his voice softening slightly. Legally, you're in the clear, but on a personal level, make sure you're prepared for the blowback. This is a significant move. I'm prepared, I replied and ended the call. One down. Next, I called my lawyer, a practical woman named Maria who had helped me with my will a year prior. I explained the situation with the car. Is your name the only one on the title and registration? She asked. Yes. Did you have a written agreement with your father gifting him the car? No. I just handed him the keys for his birthday. Then it's your car, James, she said simply. Legally and ethically, you can take possession of it whenever you like. Given the family situation, I'd suggest you do it sooner rather than later. If he refuses to return it, we can involve law enforcement, but it's cleaner if you can just retrieve it yourself. Do you have a spare key? I do, I said. Good. Then there's nothing illegal about you taking back your own property. It's clean. Just be safe. 2 down. I hung up and looked at the spare key sitting on my desk. Felt heavy with meaning. I didn't hesitate. I drove to my parents' house. It was 9:30 in the morning. My father would be at his country club, playing his mid-morning round of golf, complaining about his handicap, blissfully unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. My mother would likely be at her book club, discussing a novel, a world away from the real-life drama about to unfold. The street was quiet, lined with manicured lawns. I pulled my own modest car up to the curb a block away and walked to their driveway. There it was, the gleaming blue sedan, a monument to my foolish hope. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. This was real. This was happening. I walked up to the car, clicked the unlock button on my spare fob, and the car chirped in response, a sound of allegiance. I slid into the driver's seat. The smell of the leather was still there, but it no longer smelled like success. It smelled like disrespect. I started the engine, backed out of their driveway, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. When I got home, I parked the sedan in my garage and closed the door, hiding it from view. The final step was the easiest, a series of cold, impersonal clicks. I logged into my online banking portal. I located the automatic payments I had set up years ago as a convenience for them, a convenience they had come to see as an entitlement. The Wilson Country Club membership. Cancel payment. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure?" My finger didn't hesitate. I clicked yes. The premium cable and sports package. Cancel payment. Yes. I went to my life insurance policy and removed my parents as secondary beneficiaries, replacing them with Uncle Harold. Click, click, click. With each click, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was the weight of expectation, of unreciprocated obligation. By 10 a.m. it was all done. The financial firewall was in place. I sat at my kitchen table and drank a glass of water, my hands surprisingly steady. I had expected to feel guilty or sad or angry. Instead, I just felt quiet. The silence lasted for about 2 hours. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, Emma. "Mom said you stole Dad's car. What the hell is wrong with you, James? Call me now." I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another buzz. "Are you serious? You're going to ignore me? Dad is going to lose his mind. You're being incredibly petty and childish." I put my phone on silent. An hour after that, my phone started ringing. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately, and again. On the 4th try, I picked up, and that's when I heard the words I described at the beginning of this story. "James, the car is gone. Someone stole your father's car." The panic in her voice was real. The utter disbelief that I, the quiet, dependable son, could be responsible for this disruption. And as I told her that I had taken back my own property, I knew they didn't understand. They didn't understand at all. They wouldn't. Not until the consequences became too big to ignore. And that was about to happen very, very soon. The family meeting was my grandfather's idea. He called 2 days after what my family was now referring to as the incident. His voice on the phone was grave. "James, you need to come to my house this Sunday. Your parents, Emma, Daniel. We need to sort this out as a family." I didn't want to go. My first instinct was to say no, to maintain my distance. I felt like a defendant being summoned to his own trial. But Sophia changed my mind. We were sitting on my couch, the audit report from Bill Parker lying on the coffee table between us like a loaded gun. "You should go," she said. "This isn't a trial where you're the defendant. This is a hearing where you're the key witness. Don't let them control the narrative. Go there and own what you did." She was right. So on Sunday, I walked into my grandfather's house. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating blanket of resentment. My parents were on one couch, my father's face a mask of thunderous rage, my mother's tear-stained and blotchy. Emma and Daniel sat opposite them, Emma glaring at me while Daniel just looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. My grandfather sat in his armchair at the head of the room, the reluctant judge. Uncle Harold and Aunt Margaret were there too, sitting off to the side, their presence a small comfort. James, my grandfather began, his voice weary, your father tells me you've taken his car and frozen their accounts. This is no way to treat your mother and father. Before I could answer, my father exploded. No way to treat them? He's trying to ruin us. After everything we've done for him. I paid for his college education. You paid for half, Dad. I corrected him calmly. I paid for the other half with scholarships and student loans, which I paid off myself 5 years ago. Semantics, he roared. It's insane. Emma jumped in, her voice sharp. This is unbelievably petty, James. Just because Dad said a few words you didn't like? You're going to destroy our family over a hurt feeling? You were always so sensitive. Sensitive? I looked at her, truly looked at her. No, Emma. I was tolerant. There's a difference. And this isn't about a few words. This is about years of disrespect. This is about being treated like an ATM. That's ridiculous. My mother sobbed. We love you. Your love is conditional, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. It's conditional on me being quiet, knowing my place, and funding a lifestyle you can't afford. I saw a flash of hurt in her eyes, but it was the truth. This is when my father played the card he thought was his ace. This is illegal, he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You can't just cut us off. I'll sue you. I'll drag you through the courts until you have nothing left. You hear me? Nothing. I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this. I met his furious gaze with a calm one of my own. You can try, I said calmly, but my lawyer has already confirmed that everything I did was perfectly legal. The car is in my name. The country club membership was paid from my account. And the retirement fund? I paused, letting the word hang in the air. The fund was set up by me, with me as the sole trustee. I have absolute authority over it. The color drained from my father's face. He looked at me, his mouth slightly agape. It wasn't the shock of learning new information. It was the shock of a bully who just realized his victim is no longer afraid of him. It was the shock of a man learning that the power he thought he had was an illusion. And since you brought it up, I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket, I had the fund audited. I pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers. I was curious where $250,000 of security had gone. Turns out, $60,000 of it went to funding. Let's see. Spa weekends, golf trips, designer clothes, and multiple 5-star dinners. All based on the investment advice of your son-in-law. I looked over at Daniel. He was now studying the pattern on the carpet with intense focus, as if it held the secrets to the universe. My father was speechless, sputtering. Emma looked from the papers in my hand to her husband, a flicker of doubt in her eyes for the first time. Daniel? What is he talking about? Before Daniel could formulate a lie, something unexpected happened. Uncle Harold, who had been silent the entire time, cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. Robert, he said, his voice quiet but firm, resonating through the tense room. You need to stop. You stay out of this, Harold, my father snapped. No, Harold said, standing up. He wasn't a big man, but at that moment he seemed to fill the room. I've stayed out of it for 35 years, and I've watched you belittle this boy his entire life. I won't be quiet anymore. He turned to my grandfather. Dad, you know it's true. Then he looked back at my father. You talk about what you've done for him? You talk about love? Let me remind you of what he's done for you. Who paid to have your roof replaced last winter after the storm? Robert? It wasn't Daniel. It was James. Who paid your hospital bill when you had that scare with your heart 2 years ago because your insurance had a massive deductible? It was James. Who bought you a new water heater when yours died in the middle of January? James. And he never said a word. He never asked for a thank you. He just did it. Each sentence was a hammer blow, dismantling the narrative my father had built his identity on. I could see the memories flickering in my mother's eyes. Aunt Margaret was nodding along, tears in her eyes. And you, Harold said, now looking at me. You let him do it because you have a good heart. But you can't let him crush it, son. You did the right thing. The room was utterly silent. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. My father sank back into the couch, looking old and defeated. My mother was weeping silently. Then I laid out my terms. This isn't a negotiation, I said, my voice clear and strong. This is how it's going to be. The fund remains frozen until a formal, third-party financial plan is put in place. All withdrawals will require my written sign-off. The car stays with me. The country club membership is gone. These are not punishments. These are the new boundaries. I looked at each of them. My financial support is a privilege. And from now on, that privilege must be earned through basic human respect. The kind of respect you give to a stranger on the street. That's the bare minimum. The discussion ends here. I stood up. Sophia stood with me. I nodded to my grandfather and Uncle Harold, and we walked toward the door. The war of words was over. I had won. But standing there, I didn't feel the thrill of victory. I just felt the heavy, somber weight of a necessary amputation. I had cut away a toxic part of my life to save the rest. The days following the family meeting were quiet, but it was the eerie quiet of an earthquake's aftermath. The ground had stopped shaking, but everyone was waiting for the aftershocks. The family's carefully constructed facade had been shattered, and the cracks were beginning to show everywhere. The first tremor came from my mother. The financial freeze was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a daily reality. She called me a week later. Her voice wasn't angry or hysterical this time. It was small, defeated. "James," she said, "the property tax bill is due. We don't have the money in our checking account." "I'm aware, Mom," I said. I had seen the due date on the calendar. "Send me the bill. I'll pay it directly." "Oh, okay. Thank you." There was a pause. "And the car? Your father is having a hard time getting around. He can use a taxi or a ride-sharing service," I said, my voice neutral. "But the country club, the membership has been canceled," I stated flatly. I heard a little sigh. The loss of the car was an inconvenience. The loss of the country club was a social death sentence. "Your father is not taking this well. He just sits in his study all day. He won't talk to me." "That's between you and him," I said. It sounded harsh, but it was necessary. I was no longer the family mediator, the emotional shock absorber. The second, more significant tremor came from my sister. With my financial support gone, the pressure fell squarely on the power couple. Emma called me furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she shrieked into the phone. "Mom and Dad expect me and Daniel to just pick up all their bills. We can't afford this." "Really?" I asked, a hint of ice in my tone. "I thought you were looking at houses in the Hamptons." She was silent for a moment. That's different. That's an investment. You lived a lifestyle funded in part by my quiet contributions, Emma. You were happy to let me be the family bank as long as it benefited you. Now the bank is closed." I could hear Daniel's voice in the background, telling her to calm down, to get off the phone. The cracks in their perfect marriage were becoming visible. Daniel, the rainmaker, was suddenly uncomfortable when it came time to actually make it rain for his in-laws. His generosity, it seemed, was performative. I got a clearer picture of that a few nights later. I couldn't sleep and went for a late drive. On a whim, I drove past Emma and Daniel's house. The lights were on. I saw them through the big picture window, their bodies stiff with anger. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the argument. Emma was pleading, her hands outstretched. Daniel was pacing, running his hands through his hair, his slick composure gone. He looked trapped. He wasn't the confident shark from the restaurant. He was a cornered animal. It was a powerful image, a glimpse behind the perfect curtain. But the biggest crack, the one that would bring the whole rotten structure down, came from an unexpected source. My friend Michael called me one afternoon. "You are not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. I was having lunch with a guy from a rival investment firm. We were just shooting the breeze, And I mentioned your brother-in-law, Daniel Chun. And this guy laughed. He said, "Oh, Danny boy, the guy who promises the moon and delivers green cheese." He said there are rumors all over Wall Street that Daniel's firm is built on a house of cards. They're being discreetly investigated by the SEC for overpromising and misrepresenting returns to investors. My blood ran cold. It all clicked into place. Daniel's desperation for my co-signature. His constant need to project success. His advice to my parents to drain their retirement fund. He wasn't just arrogant, he was a fraud. And he was using my family's money, my money, to plug the holes in his sinking ship. That evening, I did my own digging. It didn't take long to find the signs if you knew where to look. Online forums for investors were filled with hushed complaints about Daniel's company. Financial reports seemed creative. He was a con artist in a $1,000 suit. And my parents had trusted him completely. The final call in this chapter of the saga came from my mother a few nights later. She sounded different. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine fear. "James," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Emma and Daniel had a terrible fight. He's been lying. About everything. His job, the money. I think he's in trouble." She started to cry. A broken, helpless sound. "He told us to invest with him. He told us to take money from the fund." She finally saw it. The man they had worshipped was a charlatan. The son they had dismissed was the one who had tried, in his own way, to protect them. "James," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. Did you know? Is that why you did all this?" I took a deep breath. "I had my suspicions, Mom," I said, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." In that moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. For both of them. They had been so blinded by the glittering facade of success that they couldn't see the solid foundation of integrity standing right in front of them. They had bet on the wrong horse, and now they were facing the ruinous cost. The next 6 months were a slow, painful process of demolition and rebuilding. Not everything was fixed. Not everything could be. But what emerged from the rubble was something more honest, more real, than what had existed before. The news about Daniel broke publicly about 2 weeks after that final, desperate call from my mother. It was worse than the rumors. His firm was a Ponzi scheme. He hadn't just exaggerated, he'd fabricated. He had been using new investors' money to pay off old ones, all while funding a lavish lifestyle for himself and Emma. The SEC froze all his assets. He was facing federal charges. The fallout was catastrophic. Emma was devastated. Her identity completely shattered. The life she had built was a lie. To her credit, after the initial shock, she handled it with a strength I never knew she had. She filed for divorce, got a small apartment, and found a new job on her own merits. She called me once, her voice quiet and humbled. "I'm sorry, James," she said, "for everything. I was so caught up in the show, I forgot what was real. It was a start. My parents were adrift. Their golden son-in-law was a criminal. Their own finances were in shambles, entirely dependent on my carefully managed distributions. The country club friends they valued so much suddenly kept their distance, as if failure were contagious. They were isolated, forced to confront the life they had actually built, not the one they had pretended to have. One Saturday, my grandfather, George, asked me to come over. We sat on his back porch, the same porch where he'd hosted so many family barbecues. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, staring out at his perfectly manicured lawn. "About your father. About me." He told me about his own father, a hard, demanding man who equated love with financial success. George had spent his whole life trying to win an approval that never came. And then, without realizing it, he had passed that same poison down to my dad. "I taught him to value the wrong things, James," George said, his voice thick with regret. "I taught him that what people thought of you was more important than who you were. I helped create the man who hurt you. And for that, I am truly sorry. It wasn't an excuse for my father's behavior, but it was an explanation. It was a piece of the puzzle that helped me understand the deep, generational roots of our family's dysfunction." The most difficult change was with my father. There was no single, dramatic moment of reconciliation. It was a series of small, awkward, incremental steps. Started when he left a message on my voicemail, his voice gruff. "The lawnmower's broken. Can't get it started." The old me would have just bought him a new one. The new me drove over with my toolkit. I spent an hour in his garage, the smell of gasoline and cut grass in the air, cleaning the carburetor and replacing the spark plug. He stood there, watching me, not saying a word. When I finally got it running with a satisfying roar, I just nodded at him. As I was about to leave, he said, his back still to me, "I suppose I was too harsh." It was the closest he could get to an apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A few weeks after that, he called and asked about my work. For the first time in my life, he asked a real question, not just a dismissive placeholder. He asked about the patent and I explained it to him. He listened. The healing, such as it was slow and incomplete. My mother learned to live within a budget. She started volunteering at the local library, finding a sense of purpose that didn't come from a price tag. My father and I started a new, tentative relationship, one built on a fragile, unspoken truce. We started working on restoring his father's old vintage car that had been rusting in the garage for 30 years. It was a shared project, a neutral ground where we could be a father and a son, without the baggage. We'd spend hours in a comfortable silence, broken only by a request for a wrench or a comment on a piece of chrome. In that silence, we were just two men working on a machine. It was better than the tense silence of the past. But the most important change was in me. I was no longer waiting for their approval. My happiness was not contingent on their validation. Sophia and I got engaged. We did it our way on a quiet hiking trip, just the two of us. When I told my parents, my mother cried, but this time, they were tears of genuine happiness. My father shook my hand and said, "She's a good woman, James. You're a lucky man." My real victory wasn't in fixing my old family. It was in building a new one. My true family became Sophia, and Uncle Harold and Aunt Margaret and my grandfather. We started our own traditions. We had barbecues at my place, simple gatherings filled with easy laughter and genuine affection. My work was going well, the promotion was a success, and Sophia and I were looking at houses not as a status symbol but as a place to build our life. One evening, we were all in my backyard. Sophia was laughing at something Uncle Harold said. My grandfather was showing me a detail on the old car engine we'd been working on. I looked around at these people, at this life I had built not by being what someone else wanted, but by finally having the courage to be who I was. I hadn't just set a boundary, I had built a home, and for the first time I felt truly, unequivocally successful. It's funny how you can live your whole life thinking you need to break down a door, when all you really needed to do was stop knocking on it and walk away. For years, I thought the goal was to get my family to finally see my worth, to finally let me in. But I was wrong. The goal was to see my own worth and to build my own door. Setting boundaries wasn't an act of war. It was an act of self-respect. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting me. It was about creating a space where I could breathe, where my value wasn't up for constant debate and negotiation. It was about turning a wall into a gate that I and only I had the key to. My relationship with my parents is quiet now. It's not the warm, idyllic bond you see in movies, and it never will be. The scars are still there. You can't erase 35 years of history, but it's honest. My father and I can work on that old car for hours talking about carburetors and chrome, and in that shared silence there's a new kind of respect. It's not the respect he has for a shark like Daniel. It's the respect one has for a man who knows how to fix a broken thing. I'll take it. My mother now sends me articles about new engineering projects. Her way of saying, "I see you. It's enough." My real family is the one that gathers in my backyard, the one I chose, and the one that chose me back. It's the easy laughter of my uncle, the warm smile of my wife, the quiet pride in my grandfather's eyes. This is the success that matters. This is the wealth that can't be spent or squandered. This is the legacy I want to build. The biggest lesson in all of this? You can't control how people treat you, but you absolutely can control whether or not you accept it. Your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. It's inherent. It's yours. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to calmly, quietly take back your car, freeze the account, and decide that you are no longer available for disrespect. It's terrifying, but on the other side of that fear is freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And if this helped you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Take care of yourselves.